Fort Wilderness Campground might be the most successful Disney resort ever built. And it's also the one that they have tried and failed to expand more times than almost any other resort on property. After decades of abandoned projects, canceled resorts, shut down attractions, and now a brand new DVC project rising right on its doorstep, Fort Wilderness might be facing the biggest change in its entire history. This is the full Wild story. From its rushed construction to the attractions that they offered, many of which ended up abandoned or canceled, to the massive resorts that nearly transformed it, and the one that will actually come close. Welcome back to our channel. If you are new here, I am Mouselet2, and for the past 9 months, I have been covering all things early days of Walt Disney World, specifically something called the Vacation Kingdom. The Vacation Kingdom has really quickly become one of my biggest Disney passions, and if you don't know what it is, I have a full deep dive on it, but also explain very briefly here. Basically, it was Disney's attempt in the early days of Walt Disney World to get guests to stay on site for longer. At the time, they only had one theme park, Magic Kingdom, but Disney wanted guests to extend their stays, to stay for multiple days. And so what they did is they offered all sorts of activities on Disney property that guests could enjoy. Things like swimming, sailing, surfing, relaxing on the beach, pools, golf, tennis, archery, horseback riding, and so much more. And we have truly covered almost every single component of the Vacation Kingdom, except archery. Where did they do that? Horseback riding. Where did they do that? Well, they did that at the Fort Wilderness Campground. And there is so much lore here that we have somehow not gotten into until right now. I myself just got back from a trip at the Fort Wilderness Campground, staying at one of the new cabins, and I very quickly became obsessed with this resort. It really feels like stepping back into the early days of Disney, and that's intentional. While we tried to do almost everything that this resort has to offer, we didn't even make a dent because there is so much to do here, and there is such an insane past. So join me as we uncover the deep and layered history of the campground, including their failed plans for expansion and its future, which is at risk. Because the craziest part of all of this is that this peaceful little campground was never actually intended to stay peaceful. Disney spent decades trying to turn this into a major resort destination, complete with its own railroad, its own western town, its own water park, and even its own funhouse attraction. And every single one of those plans failed. So let's dive into Chapter 1, why was it even built? To understand why Fort Wilderness became such a magnet for expansions, we have to actually look at why it was even built in the first place. I've spent a lot of time on this channel looking at the original sketch that Walt did for Walt Disney World, because it was so telling of what would come and be created for this park. This is a true back-of-the-napkin sketch where Walt drew a very rough layout after he purchased the land for Disney. It was here where he drew out where the resorts would be, where the city of Epcot would be, Magic Kingdom, an entrance complex, an airport, golf, and more. And of those things he drew, 2 of them were campsites. Now, a direct quote from Disney legend Admiral Joe Fowler, one of the 2 iconic Joes who made basically Disney World what it is today, he said that now, right from the very beginning, one of Walt's concepts of the Disney World was that there would be a location where people could come in with campers. It wouldn't necessarily be the people coming in with the expensive automobiles, but the average man with his family. Because Walt was always very family-oriented, there just wasn't anything we did in Disneyland that would not be accepted by the family. He was always very careful about that. Now, after Walt's initial very quick sketch, Disney developed a more formal master plan. And in this 1967 master plan, we can see that they formalized the locations for camping a little bit more. One of them was by the entrance plaza and another one near Bay Lake. But just 1 year later, by 1968, things had changed pretty considerably. The largest piece, and we've talked about this a lot on this channel, is the creation of the Seven Seas Lagoon. The reason they did that was related to constructability issues on that land, and that just evolved to them changing the entire layout of their plans for the Magic Kingdom area. But the other larger change was that they broke the Florida project into distinct pieces: Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3. Phase 1 would be the Vacation Kingdom. It would be the Magic Kingdom and then the nearby resorts. Phase 2 would be Epcot. Phase 3, maybe an airport. There were a lot of things going on here. And the reason Disney did this is just they were not ready to jump into those Phase 2 components yet, not without Walt's leadership. And so they paused and they said, we'll start with this smaller piece, and if things go well, we can expand and we can expand and we can expand. The 1968 Disney Master Plan describes Phase 1 as, in concept, Phase 1 of Walt Disney World is being designed as a complete family vacation kingdom, a place of entertainment crowned by a new theme park similar to Disneyland. a place of recreation where land and water sports abound, and a place of relaxation, catering to the needs not only of guests who come for the day, but planned and oriented around activities for those who stay here for part or all of their family vacation. Now, the master plan goes really deep into the plans for the 5 monorail resorts. If you don't know, Disney didn't just plan to build the Polynesian and the Contemporary. There were 3 other resorts they were planning: the Venetian, the Persian, and the Asian. Those never happened, and again, I have a deep dive on that. If you want to learn more, you should just basically go watch all of my videos, guys. There's a lot of good stuff there, okay? But oddly enough, while it goes deep into the plans for those resorts, it barely touches on the campground. It's almost like it was an afterthought. The few sentences that it says are Disney World will provide accommodations ranging from luxurious suites to wooded campsites. A large campsite and recreational vehicle area will be located along the lakefront, offering direct access to beaches and recreation activities. Now, even odder, because in the 1968 Disney Annual Shareholder Report, they don't even mention the campground. There's a graphic that shows they were hard at work creating the Seven Seas Lagoon, B, and the theme park, C, and the future resort hotels, which are D, but it doesn't explicitly call out anything campground related. My best guess, just knowing what I know about Disney history and looking at this graphic, is that this location D was the planned location for the campground, but there is no mention of that. I'm just counting that there's 6 resort sites and there's only 5 that Disney had announced. So maybe that was the planned site for the campground and they just simplified it on the graphic. But in general, I was like, what is going on? Why are they not teasing more and announcing more about this campground? Is it because they weren't excited about it? No, they were excited about it. They just weren't doing anything. They literally weren't doing anything for it. They weren't breaking ground on it. They weren't even planning it. From an interview with the Walt Disney Archives and Dick Nunes, the famous Disney surf machine Dick Nunes, he said that the Disney executive Cart Walker calls me up and says, "We've got to have a campground." And I said, "We don't have any money for a campground, sir." "Don't worry about money. I'll get it," he said. Walt wanted people to be able to sleep in everything from a suite to a sleeping bag. We've got to have a campground. And so Dick Nunes tasked a man named Keith Camback, who had worked at Disneyland, in assembling a team. But there was a big issue here, which is that Keith had literally no experience with campgrounds. And so what Dick Nunes did was he sent him on a 6-month tour to research the best campgrounds in the United States. This is still something that the Disney Imagineering team does to this day. For Animal Kingdom, they had Imagineers all over the world doing research. They did it for Pandora. They're going to do it for basically every land, like the Villain's Land. So it's really cool knowing that it kind of started, or one of the early things it did was with the campground. And so after a 6-month research trip, Keith arrived in Florida in early 1971 to find wilderness, swampland, and nothing started for the campground because that was his job. So he only had a couple of months to build it. And not only that, but in general, the Disney World project was just a little bit behind schedule. They even had a sign up on the castle that said, "Remember, opening October 1971. And so what that meant was that Keith just didn't have a big team or a lot of resources to build the campground. He didn't have much money, he didn't have much crew, he didn't have much equipment. And there's a lot more lore about how Keith even made this possible, but in the end, he finished it just 1 month late and the campground opened in November of 1971. Chapter 2, Fort Wilderness Campground opens. And so the Fort Wilderness Campground opened 1 month after Magic Kingdom and the other resorts. It was rushed, it didn't have much money going into it, but it was a smash success.
In Walt Disney World, there is another wilderness set aside for the use of guests who enjoy the outdoors, the Fort Wilderness Campgrounds. There are accommodations for 800 campers, trailers or tents, each site equipped with all the modern facilities, yet in a natural setting of piney woods and stands of cypress. Here, every member of the family can find activities to his or her own taste. Part of the Fort Wilderness Campground is known as the Tri-Circle D Ranch, the home of all the horses who work in Walt Disney World. After a full day of outdoor fun comes the time to rest and relax a while, because there is still more to come. It is time to gather round and join in the song and dance.
Basically, the Fort Wilderness Campground offered a lot. So it wasn't just popular with guests staying there, but it was popular with visitors at Disney property who all wanted to come to the campground as well. And Disney looked at that and said, that's interesting. And that's kind of where some of the problems started. Because after its opening year, Fort Wilderness in Disney's eyes was going to expand into something kind of unrecognizable. Chapter 3, Even Bigger Plans. After a couple of years of Fort Wilderness being open, Disney had even bigger plans that would make Fort Wilderness Campground almost unrecognizable. Now, just about a year after the campground opened, it had already expanded multiple times to add more campsites. That was always the plan. By March of 1973, a total of 717 campsites would be available to guests, which is a huge increase from what it had at opening day. But again, Disney had even bigger plans, and they talk about it in their 1972 annual shareholder report. Because in general, at the time, the company was kind of booming. They were expanding almost everywhere at Walt Disney World. They had a new show coming to Magic Kingdom, The Walt Disney Story. They were building Tom Sawyer's Island. They were adding a new quick service restaurant, the Plaza Pavilion. They were developing the golf resort and so much more. And Fort Wilderness was not left out, because in that shareholder report, they revealed their big plan. Early in 1973, a narrow-gauge steam railroad with Victorian-style open-air cars will begin transporting guests along a 3-mile loop of track between their campsites and the campground's reception, recreation, and entertainment areas. By next summer, the steam train will also connect with the new Fort Wilderness Stockade and Western Town, where complete dining, shopping, and entertainment facilities are being built out in phases. Okay, can we pause for a minute? A railroad? A narrow gauge steam railroad? Just kind of for reference, this was a lot like the Magic Kingdom Railroad, but skinnier. I love a narrow gauge railroad. I saw one in Portland, Maine, just like earlier this year, and I was obsessed. And this was going to serve as the transportation for the campground. Goodbye horse-drawn carriages. You want to get around the campground? You hop on a train. So quaint, so unique, so fun, honestly. And then also the component about the Fort Wilderness Stockade and Western Town. These names itself are not as important as the intent, which was just to build out Fort Wilderness. And when I say that, I mean it. They wanted to build it out. They didn't want just the quaint little forgotten Fort Wilderness. They wanted this to be kind of something big. And Disney was open with this. They said that one of the most successful new areas of company operations and a new base for generating additional per capita spending has been the Fort Wilderness Campgrounds, which already have the reputation of being among the finest to be found anywhere in the United States. What Disney saw and they wrote about was that people were loving the nature trails and the boating and the swimming and the sunbathing and the horseback riding and the campfires and the playgrounds and the petting zoo. The train would soon leave a trial phase and it could carry 90 guests at a time. But Disney still wanted more. So they decided nighttime entertainment. This would expand the offerings. This was around a time that the company was adding a lot of nighttime entertainment options because they had the luau at the Polynesian and it was selling out every single night. And so they started offering dinner cruises on the Seven Seas Lagoon and things at the Contemporary Resort with dancing and live music. And they wanted to add something to their campground as well. And so this is when Pioneer Hall popped up. Pioneer Hall was a 250-seat steakhouse for ranch-style barbecues, which was equipped for musical stage shows. And that stage show was the Hoop-De-Doo Revue. This is a deep dive for another day, but just worth noting, I just saw this show and I love this show so much. I've seen it twice now. If you've never been to Hoop-De-Doo Revue, you don't have to be staying at the campground to do it, and you really should because it is a really cool piece of Disney history and the food is also so good. So there are a lot of things happening. Disney's really setting their eyes on expanding the campground and building it out. But it wasn't enough. They said more. From the 1974 Disney Annual Shareholder Report, the Fort Wilderness Swimming Hole, a major recreational facility, is now being planned for the area. Along with the other existing attractions and activities now available in Fort Wilderness, this themed swimming area will make it possible for the company to develop a ticket book for the campground recreational activities. That's kind of crazy, a ticket book. A ticket book is what Magic Kingdom had. You paid for a ticket book, A through E tickets, to go and ride rides at Magic Kingdom. Bringing that to the campground, that was really interesting. Disney was seeing dollar signs. They wanted to monetize the campground and all of these activities. And that swimming hole recreational facility turned into the famous, not for the reasons that Disney wants, water park River Country, which we all know the fate of. Or if you don't, you're about to be in for a huge surprise in like 5 minutes. So now the year is 1975 and the Fort Wilderness Campground is really on top, and we are almost done with the fact that they are on top, and just wait, okay? Just wait. River Country has opened up, and this is something that's really new and kind of advanced for Disney, a fully themed water park. In its first 4 months, it hosted 420,000 guests, with close to 5,000 guests per day in July and August. The park itself was 6 acres, which is kind of small in terms of a water park, but it had a whitewater rapids ride, a raft ride, rope swings, a 260-foot, 2,000-gallon per minute water slide called the Whoopin' Holler Hollow, and more. They had even more plans to expand it. Already, the company's Imagineers are at work designing new attractions for River Country, possibly to include more water slides, an additional raft ride, or a two-man boat ride. Fort Wilderness itself is also slated for further expansion in the near future. Plans call for a frontier town, a new recreational complex, and still more campsites. And is Disney done? No, they're not. No, they said more. And so they set out to do something that was groundbreaking for then and actually would have been groundbreaking even today. They set out to build an attraction, like one that they would have in Magic Kingdom. The initial pitch for this attraction was themed around a red barn, but soon it formalized into the Mark Davis Adventure House. And I just need to give full credit to the blog Passport to Dreams for this information, because it is not mentioned in any Disney public documents that I could find, but somehow Passport to Dreams got their hands on some official 1976 memos, and that's where all of this information comes from. And so what they were planning was functionally a fun house. It had a full detailed backstory, and it would be a walkthrough attraction with tons of different rooms like Mode's Kitchen and the Hall of Doors and the Barrel Room. Kind of think of like a walk-through Haunted Mansion style attraction, but more funhouse. And why didn't this happen? We don't know specifically, but just likely there were a lot of shifting priorities during this time in the late 1970s, with their eyes set on Epcot and just putting so many resources to there. So now we have an incredibly successful campground. They offer all sorts of activities. They're doing spectacular. They have 89% occupancy. They have all sorts of things that guests are loving. They have boats, they have bikes, they have Marshmallow Marsh, a nighttime campfire that guests can take a little canoe to or take a little bridge to. RIP, this is abandoned today, just FYI. In 1978, they added wilderness homes, which were the really early style cabins. They had Pioneer Hall, they had River Country, they had more. A little snafu in 1980 when the Fort Wilderness Railroad closed after less than 10 years in service. They never announced officially why, but a lot of things were stated were maintenance costs, operational issues, and just safety issues with all of the grade crossings. There was also some complaints from guests about noise because the train was a real train steam engine and was a little bit noisy. Disney didn't leave guests with no transportation. They added trams, like parking lot trams at first, that later became buses, and that's what they have today. But this did sort of change the vibe of the campground a little bit. But that didn't stop the success of the campground yet, because in 1985, they opened up the Meadow Recreation Complex. This was the first pool ever to come to the campground. A really good time because in about 10 years, they would phase out swimming, and so they really needed a pool. And in 1990, one of the biggest things to date, the biggest things Disney ever planned for resorts really, was about to come. That might be a little too much. They were in progress of planning it. And just for some context here, this was 1990. Disney has announced the Disney decade. Michael Eisner has said that 1990 to 2000, we're going to be doing so many things we've never been doing before. I love Michael Eisner in this era because he just did so much good for the theme parks and for the resorts, and Fort Wilderness Campground was not left out. And there's a lot of good documentation about the Disney decade, and there's a lot of things that were not all that well documented. Things that were canceled are usually a little bit harder to find information about. But I found myself with a document in hand called Walt Disney World Expansion Projects. Thank you, Retro Walt Disney World, for this document. And here they outlined expansion plans for all of the theme parks and many of the resorts. Things like the Boardwalk, the Mediterranean Resort, RIP, also maybe a deep dive coming soon, the Wilderness Lodge, the Buffalo Junction, the Kingdom Suites Hotel, which is my literal Roman Empire that I just have to learn more about, and there's no details anywhere about it. But pause. Buffalo Junction. Buffalo Junction was going to be a 600-room hotel themed in the style of a Wild West town, and it was set for the second phase of the Fort Wilderness Resort expansion. So what do we really know about it? Well, it was going to be sandwiched between where Wilderness Lodge is today and Fort Wilderness in a stretch of undeveloped land. It was going to resemble the street of a western town in the late 19th century, and it would really help provide a thematic link between the early kind of frontier theme of Fort Wilderness and then the more national park theme of the Wilderness Lodge. The hotel would combine lodging with dinner venues and shops and entertainment. It would also apparently have a stateside version of Paris's Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, because they had their own kind of Wild West themed hotel. Still do, actually. But the coolest part of this is that the train was going to make a comeback. They had a train loop. You can see it on their concept art. They were going to bring back some sort of form of the Fort Wilderness Railroad, and it would have connected all three 3 of these resorts to really kind of thematically tie everything together. But it never happened. Obviously, you probably know that, primarily due to kind of budget issues with Euro Disney being built and again, just shifting priorities. There were so many big ideas in the 90s, like turning Spaceship Earth into a roller coaster, but a lot of them didn't end up happening. And it's really kind of a shame that this didn't happen because I know a lot of people would never want a resort near the campground, foreshadowing a little bit here, but this would have really thematically kind of tied this all together. It would have restored the railroad and it would have been a really, really unique way to keep the integrity of the campground. But that didn't happen. Chapter 4. Things go a little downhill. The year is 2000. Disney is on top. Money is flowing. Guests are pouring in. They are doing so well. But then 1 year later is 2001 and 9/11 occurs. And on the many impacts that 9/11 had, one of them was on tourism. Tourism in the United States took a massive drop and Disney was hit hard by it. And so Disney, who didn't have that many guests flowing in, really put a pause on a lot of their projects. Things that were in progress were stopped completely, like the second half of Pop Century was just fully abandoned for a while. Other things never even got off of the ground, like some of the planned ideas for Epcot. And they also started something that they hadn't really had to do that much in the past called seasonal operation, or as I call it, death. Just as a kind of a current day example of something that went seasonal operating, Stitch's Great Escape, that obviously was closed, or like the Diamond Horseshoe restaurant that seasonally operates. I mean, I haven't seen that open since like 2018, but what seasonally operated that we're talking about here is River Country. River Country went seasonally operating. Kind of. Actually, it just sort of closed in 2001 for like its annual maintenance, which was related to its seasonal operating status, and then it never reopened. And Disney never really said anything until about 3 years later in 2004 when they finally announced that it would never reopen. Like maybe there was like enough guest demand that it would, but like no, it would never reopen. And so here we're thinking like, wow, Disney has put so much time and money into this campground and building it out. So yeah, they're going to close River Country, but obviously they have something planned, right? I mean, they're going to turn it maybe into like a pool or like a attraction complex for the campground, or maybe they'll have to demolish it, but they'll turn it into something else. No. After that, basically all expansions that Disney planned for Fort Wilderness stopped. And so for many decades, Fort Wilderness Campground really sat kind of on the back burner. Disney wasn't going to pour any capital or innovation into it. People would just continue to do what they had always done. They would do horseback rides and they would canoe and they would rent bikes and they would do simple things, and that was what people wanted at the campground. So honestly, this actually really worked pretty well for Disney and for people at the campground. River Country just kind of sat there and rotted and decayed. But other than that, other than the decaying abandoned water park that they sort of left back there, the campground was really frozen in time, and that's just how people wanted it. But all good things come to an end, right? Chapter 5. The Cash Cow. No, this isn't about a petting zoo at Fort Wilderness. This is about the Disney Vacation Club.
So, Dad, any advice?
Make time for moments like this. What's the best part of every vacation? The memories. And Disney Vacation Club offers a lifetime of them. Call 877-GO-GO-DVC today.
The Disney Vacation Club was Disney's basically cash cow in the 2000s. They launched it and it was successful and it was bringing so much money in and it meant return guests, and Disney knew that this is what they needed and wanted to invest in. And so all across property, they wanted to build more DVC resorts and DVC rooms and get more DVC guests. And so in 2010, Disney very, very quietly filed new permits for the old River Country land, meaning that after just about 7 years abandoned, they were going to demolish this water park. And this revealed the first signs of a major future resort. So major, in fact, that they were going to have to relocate the Tri-Circle D Ranch. By 2011, they had full plans drafted for an 8-story DVC resort right at the Fort Wilderness Campground. In fact, it would be called the Fort Wilderness Villas, which is actually kind of an oxymoron. Now, these plans stayed secret until around 2014, when a now deleted Twitter account, Amusement Leaks, published several images from the project nicknamed Wilderness Way Resort. The concept featured a lazy river, pool areas inspired by River Country, which is so cool, and theming really kind of close to the Wilderness Lodge. But then everything stopped. The permits expired and River Country continued to sit abandoned. And why? We don't really know, because this resort was never publicly announced. Disney never really reflected on it. It was leaked. And so we don't know why, but we know that it didn't happen, obviously. And so then after these kind of bigger plans that people could have hypothetically been excited for, but they didn't know about them, River Country just continued to sit abandoned. And in 2014, I visited River Country legally because there was a restaurant on property that you could still go to and get a really good look at all of the stuff that used to be there. And I have a full River Country deep dive, and that's what I'll link for you here if you want to go learn about my experience and more about this water park. It is a really, really cool background, but for what you need to know for this video, it just continued to decay and sit abandoned. And then finally, after about 16 years of it sitting completely ignored and abandoned and decaying, Disney made an official announcement that a new resort would be built on the site of the old River Country water park. And that resort was Reflections, a Disney lakeside lodge where a DVC resort was planned for the shores of Bay Lake. There were plans for rooms themed around Bambi and Brother Bear and the Fox and the Hound and Pocahontas. And it seemed cool, but it did have really mixed reviews just because of the stark contrast between what the campground was and what Reflection should be. And I don't know, people didn't love it, but in the end, that kind of worked out because it was never built. Disney canceled the project. They didn't say why, but it was right at the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Big drop in tourism and investments and things like this weren't something that was really going to happen. And that's why things like Tron took literally forever. But that's not the end of this story, because in 2024 to 2025, Disney announced yet another new resort for this property. This is now the 4th resort that they've announced for this area. Buffalo Junction, and then the Wilderness Way Resort, and then Reflections, and now Disney's Lakeshore Lodge. The Lakeshore Lodge, in a way, kind of revives a lot of the older ideas they had for those other resorts. It's going to be inspired by the majesty of nature and its enduring influence on Disney artists. And it is in construction right now. But here's the thing. Okay. I'm very excited about this resort. In general, I think a new resort is really exciting. I think they're going to do a good job. But I told you, I just got back from the campground, right? And I was getting on a boat to Magic Kingdom. So at the dock, and I looked to my left, and not even 20 feet away was one of the cabins they're building for this new resort. The cabins look cool. The whole thing looks cool, but it is so close to the campground. It's not even funny. And when you think of the old plans they had for those resorts, like Buffalo Junction, that was going to be integrated with the campground, which made sense. Even thinking about the Fort Wilderness villas, which I think were flawed in many ways, it was going to be kind of integrated with the campground again. I think that makes sense. But this resort, they haven't said anything about it being like a sister resort to the campground, but it's so close that it just is going to change so vastly how the campground operates, I fear. Again, I'm excited for it, but it's close. And so now the question is, will Disney's Lakeshore Lodge really negatively impact the campground? Will it add to it and add more offerings? And we don't know yet because it's still under construction. I'm tentatively excited, a little bit worried, but I think Disney will do right by the campground because it is loved by so many. And so hopefully they find the correct way to kind of segment these two spaces or to merge them together in a way that's beneficial for both. But that is really all I have for you today. Disney's Fort Wilderness Campground is really kind of a forgotten piece of Disney history. I swear there are probably so many guests who go to Disney and have no idea that nearby people are literally camping in tents and pop-up campers and RVs, and that is what I think makes it so special. Thank you for joining me on today's deep dive. If you like this content, I have to do a little plug because for the month of December on Instagram and TikTok, we are doing Disney Factmas. This will be a daily episode all about some of the coolest Disney history, things like remnants of the Fort Wilderness Railroad. So if you're interested in that type of thing and you don't already follow us on Instagram and TikTok, go head over there now because we post a lot of really cool stuff and it'd be fun to have you over there. But also keep an eye out every Thursday for our podcast, Sisters, and every Monday for more Disney deep dives. I have a couple of things in the works that I'm excited about. A People Mover deep dive, an Epcot deep dive, maybe something with the Magic Kingdom swan boats, which has always just been a passion of mine. But if there's anything you want to see about the early days of Disney World, please let me know because I would love to cover it also. And now it is time for me to head out for my sister's baby shower, guys, but I will see you all in 2 weeks. Bye!